You are not having a heart attack, and you are not staying in my emergency department," Dr. Cyrus Bellamy said, loud enough that 3 nurses and a waiting room full of people all turned their heads. "So you can walk out on your own, or I can have security help you find the door. Your choice." Renee Guillory didn't argue. She didn't reach for her phone or raise her voice. She just looked up at him from the gurney, with a small, tired, patient smile, the kind of smile a person gives when they've already decided how a thing is going to end. Bellamy thought he was clearing a time waster off his board before his noon meeting. He had no idea that the quiet woman in the drugstore reading glasses and the faded church sale coat was the one person in the state who could take his license, his hospital privileges, and the federal appointment he'd been bragging about at every dinner table for a month. It was a Thursday in late June, and the heat outside Harford Memorial in Birmingham was the wet, close kind that made the parking lot shimmer. Inside the emergency department, it was cold enough to raise gooseflesh, the way hospitals always seem to be, as if the building itself were trying to keep something from spoiling. Renee had been in that hard vinyl bed for 2 hours and 40 minutes. She'd been triaged, sort of. A rushed young tech had slapped a blood pressure cuff on her, written down numbers that were high enough to matter, and disappeared. Nobody had come back. She had come in complaining of chest tightness and a fluttering in her arm, which was true in the loose way that most things a 56-year-old woman says about her own body are true. The symptoms were mild. They were also exactly the kind of thing that is supposed to earn a person an EKG, a set of labs, a troponin drawer, and at minimum a doctor who looks them in the eye. She had presented herself as Renee Guillory, of no fixed insurance, unemployed, address a rooming house on the west side. She had filled the forms out in a careful, slightly shaky hand. She had done everything an ordinary frightened person would do. For most of those 2 hours she had watched. She'd watched Bellamy work the floor the way some men work a room at a party, moving fast, talking over people, never quite landing his eyes on the person in front of him. She had watched him lean into the doorway of the bay across from hers, where an old black man named Cyrus Pruitt sat in a wheelchair with a Vietnam veteran's cap on his head and a leg that had swollen tight and shiny. Mr. Pruitt had tried to explain that his water pills weren't working, that he couldn't get his shoe on, that his chest felt heavy when he lay down. Bellamy had cut him off. "Sir, this is an emergency room, not a refill counter. You need to see your primary." When Mr. Pruitt said quietly that he didn't have a primary, that the VA clinic was 90 minutes away, and he didn't drive at night anymore, Bellamy had already turned his back. Then that's a planning problem, not a medical one. He'd said it to a chart, not to a man. She had watched him do it to a young mother too, a girl named Brianna Meeks, who couldn't have been 22, holding a baby that was flushed and floppy and too quiet. Bellamy glanced at the child from 6 feet away, asked if the girl had given Tylenol, and when she said she didn't have any at home, he said, in front of everyone, "Of course you don't," and told a nurse to have them wait to be seen, which in that emergency department that afternoon meant nothing at all. Renee had sat there in her borrowed coat and let all of it soak into her like cold water into wool. She was not there by accident. She never was. 9 months earlier, the governor had stood in a marble hallway and named her the new executive director and board president of the State Board of Medical Examiners, the body that licensed every physician in Alabama and, in theory, held the power to discipline or destroy any of them. In theory. For a generation, the board had been a gentleman's club, a rubber stamp, a room where complaints from poor patients went to be quietly filed and forgotten. Renee had spent 2 decades earning the right to change that. She had grown up the daughter of a woman who cleaned other people's houses in Mobile. She had gone to Meharry on scholarships and worked night shifts to eat, then earned a law degree because she'd learned early that medicine without power was just kindness that could be overruled. She had run a trauma bay, then a hospital ethics office, then a state health authority, and she had made a career out of walking into rooms where men assumed she'd come to clean them. The Bellamy file had crossed her desk in her first month. It was thick, 22 complaints in 4 years. Nurses who'd resigned rather than keep working under him. A discharged patient who'd died of a missed pulmonary embolism after being called a drug seeker. A pattern, plain as a fingerprint, of the poor and the black, and the uninsured being turned away at the door of a hospital that was legally obligated to see them. Every one of those complaints had been marked unsubstantiated by the old board and dropped. The people who'd filed them were exactly the sort of people nobody with power had ever needed to believe. So she had decided to be believed. She had stopped signing subpoenas and started buying thrift store coats. What Bellamy didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the woman he was now threatening to have thrown out of his emergency department had been sitting in that bay for 2 hours precisely so that he would do it. She wanted the record. Not somebody else's word against his. His own words, in his own mouth, on his own floor, in front of his own staff. He was giving them to her freely. "Ma'am," Bellamy said now, and the word had a curl in it, the way some people can make ma'am sound like a slap. "Your EKG." He tapped the chart against his palm, which, frankly, "You're lucky we ran," is unremarkable. Your pressure's up because you're anxious. There is nothing wrong with your heart that isn't wrong with half the people in this waiting room, and I don't have a bed to spare for anxiety. "I understand," Renee said. Her voice was soft and she let it stay small. "I'd feel better with the blood test, though. The one that checks the heart enzymes. My chest still feels tight, and the tightness went into my jaw about 20 minutes ago." Something flickered across Bellamy's face, and it wasn't concern. It was irritation, the specific irritation of a man who has been contradicted by someone he has already filed under nobody. "Oh, we're doing our own doctoring now," he said. He looked around, playing to the floor the way she'd watched him do all afternoon. A resident near the nurse's station laughed too quickly. "Let me guess. You read about troponin online. You watched a TikTok. You just want a bed and a sandwich and a warm place to sleep off whatever you're on," Bellamy said. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I can smell it. You people come through those doors every single night with a list of symptoms straight off a website, and you think, if you say chest pain and jaw pain in the right order, we have to admit you. Well, we don't. Not on my watch, and not on my hospital's dime. You people," there it was, dropped into the cold air of the emergency department like a coin into a well. A young charge nurse named Camille Foster, standing behind him with an armful of warm blankets, went very still. Renee saw her go still. She saw the nurse's eyes come up and find hers, and she saw something pass between them, quick as a spark, that had nothing to do with medicine. Renee's own face didn't move. Underneath it, her mind was cataloguing, the way it had learned to over 30 years, refusal of an appropriate cardiac workup for a symptomatic patient, denigrating remarks, presumption of drug seeking without evidence, presumption based on class and race, all of it in the hearing of staff. She let him keep going. "Keep talking, doctor. Give me the rest of it." "You want the truth?" Bellamy leaned a hand on the rail of her gurney, close enough that she could smell coffee and expensive aftershave. "The truth is, this hospital eats about $40 million a year in unpaid bills from people exactly like you, and every one of you thinks you're the exception. You come into a nice facility, in a nice part of town, and you expect the Ritz. If you'd made better choices, you'd have a doctor and insurance and a home, and you wouldn't be lying on my gurney at 11 in the morning wasting a bed a real patient needs." He straightened up. "Now, I've been more than fair. Do you want to leave or do I make a call?" At the desk, a heavy-shouldered administrator in a golf shirt had wandered over. A man named Trip Whitaker, who ran the hospital's risk and compliance office and who had come down, as he did most days around this time, mostly to be near Bellamy because being near Bellamy was how you stayed on the right side of things at Harford Memorial. He was smiling at first. He knew Bellamy's floor shows. He'd watched 100 of them. But Whitaker's smile was starting to slip. It was slipping because the woman on the gurney was not doing what the ones on the gurney usually did. She wasn't crying, she wasn't cursing. She wasn't gathering her plastic bag of belongings and shuffling out with her shoulders up around her ears. She was lying there, perfectly composed, watching Cyrus Bellamy the way a person watches an animal that hasn't yet realized it stepped into a snare, and when she turned her head, slowly, to look directly at the young charge nurse, Whitaker felt the first cold finger of something go down his back. "Nurse," Renee said, and her voice, still quiet, had acquired an edge underneath it that hadn't been there a minute before. "Foster, is it? On your badge. I want to make sure I have the timeline right. What time was I triaged?" Camille Foster's throat moved. "And about 9:40, ma'am, and the doctor is discharging me now without a troponin, without a repeat EKG after I reported new jaw pain. It's a little after 11. Is that right?" "That's..." The nurse looked at Bellamy, then back. She was very young, and her hands were full of blankets, and she made a decision that would later matter more than she could have imagined. "Yes, ma'am. That's right. It's on the chart. It's time-stamped." Bellamy's face went a dark, mottled color. What in God's name is this? He wheeled on the nurse to get back to your assignment. And you, he jabbed a finger down at Renee. I don't know what game you think you're running, but I am done. Trip, call security and get this woman out of my department. Whitaker didn't move Tripp, Bellamy said again, and Tripp Whitaker, 30 years in hospital administration, a man who had personally shredded more inconvenient complaints than he could count, looked at the calm woman on the gurney asking a nurse to confirm timestamps, and heard, somewhere in the back of his skull, an alarm he couldn't name. Cyrus, he said carefully, maybe we run the labs, cover the bases. It's 20 minutes. I am the chief of staff of this hospital, Bellamy snapped, and I will not be second-guessed by my own risk officer in front of her. He caught the word before it fully left his mouth, but everyone in the hall heard the shape of it, heard where it had been headed, in front of a patient who is trying to game the system. Foster, if you touch a troponin order on this chart, I will have you written up for insubordination. Are we clear? Get. Security. Camille Foster put down the blankets. She would say, later, under oath, that she didn't fully decide to do it, that her hands just moved. She walked to the workstation, and instead of paging security, she opened the chart, and she entered the order for the cardiac panel, and the repeat EKG herself, under her own login, time-stamped, and she typed a nursing note in plain unhysterical language. Patient reporting ongoing chest tightness, radiating to jaw, requesting cardiac workup. Attending declined further workup and ordered discharge and removal. Charge nurse initiated protocol labs, per standing order. Then she hit save, so that it could never be unsaved. Bellamy saw what she'd done. Then Whitaker had a hand on his elbow, murmuring, steering him a few feet away, and whatever Whitaker said into his ear made Bellamy stop. Fine, Bellamy said, loud, to the whole floor, throwing up his hands like a man surrendering to idiots. Run the labs, waste the money. When they come back clean, and they will come back clean. She's discharged, and I don't want to hear another word about it. And somebody find me the schedule, because I want to know who thought putting me down here this morning was a good use of anyone's time. He walked off toward his office with his coat snapping behind him, the way a man walks when he still believes the room belongs to him. Renee lay back against the thin pillow and closed her eyes, not out of weakness, out of something closer to sorrow. She had hoped, a little, that the file was exaggerated. It was not exaggerated. It was, if anything, kind. She let them draw the labs. She stayed pleasant and vague, with Camille Foster, thanked her softly, watched the young woman's hands shake as she pulled the blood. And when it was done, when they told her the enzymes were, in fact, normal, and that she was free to go, she signed her discharge with the same careful, shaky hand she'd used on the intake forms, gathered her plastic bag, and walked out through the sliding doors into the wall of Birmingham heat. The transformation took about 10 steps. By the time she reached the far end of the parking garage, the church sale coat was folded over her arm, and her spine had come up, straight, and her chin had leveled, and the reading glasses were in her pocket. A man in a dark suit was leaning against a black sedan in a reserved spot, a lean, grey-templed man with a face that had spent a career watching for exactly this kind of thing. He straightened when he saw her. Well, said Desmond Pryor. He gave me all of it, Renee said. She opened the sedan door and slid inside, out of the heat, and Pryor came around and got behind the wheel. The refusal to work up a symptomatic patient, the remarks. He said "you people" to my face in front of his own staff. He threatened to have a nurse written up for ordering protocol labs. He tried to have me physically removed for asking for a blood test. She looked out the window at the hospital's white flank. 2 other patients before me. A veteran with a leg like a tree trunk he told to go plan better. A baby with a fever he wouldn't touch. Desmond, that baby was grey. Pryor, who had spent 11 years as a state fraud investigator before Renee pulled him into the board, put the car in gear. You want me to have someone check on the baby? Already texted. The number. Meeks. Somebody's going to make sure that child gets seen tonight if I have to drive her myself. She pulled her real phone out of the tote bag, the one she'd kept dark all morning. And I want Camille Foster protected. That young woman put her whole career on that chart. If Bellamy tries to touch her, transfer her, write her up, anything, I want to know within the hour. Done. Pryor guided the sedan out into traffic. You know he's going to figure out somebody was sitting in his ER on purpose. Not yet, he won't. His ego won't let him. He'll spend the weekend blaming the scheduling clerk. She was already scrolling, already working. Pull the complete complaint history on Bellamy. All 22. I want the ones the old board dismissed, pulled back out and re-examined, especially the Dawson death and… Desmond, get me the Enemtala logs, the on-call records, the security footage from that hallway before it recycles. I want the timeline nailed to the floor so he can't wiggle. You're not going to do the preliminary inquiry route? No. She looked at him. I'm a first-handed witness now. I sat in that bay for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I have the chart, the timestamps, a nurse's contemporaneous note, and my own testimony. We're going straight to formal proceedings. Her jaw set. I've read the file on his ambitions too. I know he's not planning to be a hospital chief of staff for much longer. Pryor nodded slowly. That's the part I was going to bring up. Cyrus Bellamy was, at that moment, the leading candidate for a nomination that most physicians in the country would have sold organs for. A seat had come open on the National Board for Health Standards, a federal body, prestigious, lifetime adjacent, insulated from the petty state politics he'd spent his whole career sneering at. Word was the announcement would come within the week. He'd been campaigning for it the way he did everything, loudly, at galas, with a scotch in his hand, surrounded by men who owed him favors. He believed he was one signature away from being finally, permanently, untouchable. Let him have his week, Renee said quietly, watching the hospital shrink in the side mirror. Let him celebrate. It'll make the fall shorter to describe. The offices of the State Board of Medical Examiners sat on the 11th floor of a glass tower downtown, a world away from the vinyl gurneys and fluorescent hum of Halford Memorial. Renee walked in a little after 2, having changed in the car into the charcoal suit that was her real armor. And the receptionist and the 2 junior staffers she passed all sat up a little straighter, because the woman who came through those doors bore no resemblance at all to the tired patient who'd let Cyrus Bellamy call her "you people" 3 hours before. She dropped the church sale coat in the wastebasket by the door on her way past. By 4, the full picture was on her desk. Pryor and 2 analysts had pulled the 22 complaints, laid them out chronologically, cross-referenced the names. What emerged wasn't a temper. It was a machine. Bellamy had spent years using the emergency department as a gate, and the gate opened for the insured and the well-dressed and the white, and it stuck for everyone else. 3 of the complainants had died. One of them, a 40-year-old maintenance worker named Dawson, turned away with what Bellamy had charted as anxiety and narcotic-seeking behavior, had been found dead in his car in the hospital's own parking lot, 90 minutes after discharge, of a saddle pulmonary embolism that a first-year resident should have caught. The old board had called it within the standard of care and closed the file. The man's widow had never even received a letter. Renee read Dawson's file twice, and then she sat very still for a long time with her hand flat on the page. Desmond, she said finally, when Bellamy's people prep his defense, they're going to say he's a distinguished physician who had one bad morning. I want the answer to that sitting on the table before he opens his mouth. I want every one of these families contacted, respectfully, by us, and I want the ones who are willing to make statements, not to ambush him, to make sure that when this is done, the record shows what it actually was, which is a pattern that this board protected for years. She closed the folder. We failed these people once. We are not going to be careful about his feelings while we fix it. She drafted the charges herself, longhand the way she always did the ones that mattered, because she wanted the weight of each word to pass through her hand. Failure to provide appropriate medical screening and stabilizing treatment. Unprofessional conduct. Patient abandonment. Discrimination in the provision of care. A separate count for the attempted retaliation against a nurse who followed protocol. She built it slow and clean, the way you build something meant to hold weight. When do we serve him? Pryor asked, near 7, when the tower had gone quiet and the city lights had come up outside the glass. He's at the Vestavia Country Club on Saturday, Renee said. There's a fundraiser. Half the medical establishment in the state will be there toasting his nomination before it's even announced. She capped her pen. Let him have Saturday. Let him give his speech. We serve him Monday morning, first thing, with a summons for an emergency disciplinary hearing, 48 hours to appear before the full panel. Pryor almost smiled. That's cold. That's fair, she said. It's more warning than Silas Pruitt got. Saturday night, the ballroom of the Vestavia Country Club glittered. Cyrus Bellamy stood at the center of it in a tuxedo that fit him like it had opinions, a glass of Macallan sweating in his hand, holding court among the people who had spent decades making sure men like him never had to answer for anything. A state senator clapped him on the back and called him the future of American medicine. A hospital system CEO toasted a man who understands that healthcare is a business. Bellamy laughed at everything, flushed and expansive, telling the story he'd been telling all week about how the country needed physicians who weren't afraid to say no, who understood that not everyone deserved a bed, who had the backbone to run a tight ship. "You have to hold the line," he said, swirling his scotch. "The second you start treating the emergency room like a homeless shelter, the whole system collapses. Somebody has to be willing to be the bad guy." The men around him nodded like it was scripture. Across the room, near a table of shrimp on shaved ice, a woman in a deep blue gown watched him. Renee hadn't planned to come. Pryor had, in fact, argued against it, but she'd wanted to see it with her own eyes. The celebration, the certainty, the way a whole roomful of powerful people could arrange themselves around a man like Bellamy, as if he were a small son. She stood at the edge of it, in her blue gown, with her hair swept up and a single strand of pearls at her throat, and she was, objectively, one of the most striking people in the room. And more than one man drifted toward her and then drifted away again, when they got close enough to feel the temperature of her attention. Bellamy's gaze crossed her twice. The second time it snagged, just for a heartbeat, on the line of her cheekbone, the set of her mouth, some ghost of familiarity his Scotch-soft brain couldn't place. He was a man who sorted people instantly into useful and useless. And the tired woman in the church sail coat, and the elegant woman in the blue gown, lived in such different drawers of his mind that it never occurred to him, not for 1 second, that they might be the same. He gave her a lazy, appreciative smile, lifted his glass an inch in her direction, and turned back to the senator. Renee set her untouched champagne on a passing tray and left. Monday morning came down on Birmingham hot and white and merciless. Cyrus Bellamy was at his desk in the Chief of Staff's office by 7:30, still riding the glow of Saturday, working through email and half listening to a sports podcast, when his assistant knocked on the door with a face like a person delivering a telegram in a war movie. "Doctor," she said, "there's a courier. He says it has to be signed for, in person. It's from the State Board." Bellamy waved a hand without looking up. "Probably a CME notice." "Sign it. He says it has to be you." He sighed, pushed back from the desk, and went out to the reception area, where a young man in a windbreaker held out a heavy envelope and a signature pad. Bellamy scrawled his name, took the envelope, and tore it open right there, expecting nothing, expecting the usual bureaucratic nothing, and read the header. State Board of Medical Examiners. Notice of formal disciplinary proceedings and mandatory summons. He read the name of the complainant witness. He read the incident location. Halford Memorial Hospital Emergency Department. Thursday, June 26. Something cold turned over in his stomach. The woman. The one on the gurney. The one who'd wanted the blood test. He'd known there was something off about her, hadn't he? He'd felt it. The way she'd looked at the nurse, the way she'd asked about the timestamps. He read the charges. Failure to provide appropriate screening. Patient abandonment. Discrimination in the provision of care. Unprofessional conduct. Retaliation. He read the line ordering him to appear before the full 6-member board on Wednesday morning at 9:48 hours out, and to show cause why his license to practice medicine in the state should not be suspended pending revocation. "Get me Nathaniel Reyes," Bellamy said. His voice came out strange, thin. "Now, and clear my week." Nathaniel Reyes was the most expensive and most feared medical license defense attorney in the Southeast, a man who had saved surgeons who'd operated drunk and psychiatrists who'd slept with patients, and when he sat down across from Bellamy an hour later and read the summons, he did something Bellamy had never seen a lawyer do. He went quiet for a long time. "Greg," Reyes said finally. He called all his clients by the wrong name, some habit. "Cyrus, this is not a complaint. This is an execution notice." "It's a misunderstanding," Bellamy said, already up and pacing. "The woman was drug-seeking. I've seen 1,000 of them. I know the type." "You said you people to a patient in front of your staff," Reyes said flatly. "You refused a cardiac workup on a symptomatic patient and tried to have her physically removed. There's a nurse's note, contemporaneous, time-stamped, that says you ordered a patient discharged and threatened to write up the nurse who followed protocol." He looked up. "You know who the board president is now?" "Some political appointee. Guillory." "I don't. Renee Guillory ran a trauma center. She's a physician and a lawyer. The governor put her in that chair specifically to burn down the old boy protection racket that's been running that board for 30 years, and she has been looking for exactly one case to make an example of. A clean one. A camera-ready one. Reyes set the summons down like it was hot, and 48 hours' notice on an emergency track, skipping the preliminary inquiry. Cyrus, that only happens when they already have everything. They're not investigating you. They've already convicted you. This hearing is the sentencing. Bellamy stopped pacing. For the first time, the ambition on his face was gone, replaced by something rawer. The nomination, he said. If the White House gets wind of a formal, disciplinary proceeding, the nomination is already gone, Reyes said, not unkindly. You just don't know it yet. They spent Tuesday building what defense there was to build. Reyes's plan was the only one available. Contrition, total and abject. Bellamy would go in humbled. He'd cite exhaustion, an unmanageable patient load, a hospital that had understaffed him. He'd fall on his sword about his temper, offer to enter a physician wellness program, offer bias training, offer anything. Whatever you do, Reyes told him, do not, for 1 second, act like you're the smartest person in that room. Do not lecture them. Do not condescend to Guillory. If you make her feel for 1 instant the way you made that patient feel, she will take everything you have and she will be right too. Humble. Bellamy repeated, nodding, sweating. I can do humble. He believed it too, but a man doesn't unlearn 30 years of certainty in a weekend, and somewhere under the fear, the old voice was already whispering that these were bureaucrats, that he was Cyrus Bellamy, and Bellamy, that he would walk in and charm them and this would blow over the way everything had always blown over. Wednesday morning, the board's hearing room was built to make a person feel small. No windows. Dark acoustic paneling. A long curved bench of pale wood where the 6 commissioners sat elevated above a single small table for the respondent. Bellamy sat at that table in his most conservative navy suit, hands folded, trying to arrange his face into penitence. Beside him, Nathaniel Reyes squared his notes and said nothing. 5 of the 6 chairs at the bench were filled. 2 physicians, a public health official, a retired appellate judge serving as the civilian appointment, a hospital ethicist. They filed in without looking at Bellamy and sat in a silence that had weight to it. The center chair, the president's chair, stood empty. Where is she? Bellamy whispered. Quiet, Reyes murmured. Don't give them anything. The side door opened. Renee Guillory walked in, wearing the charcoal suit, carrying a thick black binder, and she set the binder down on the bench with a sound like a door closing, and Cyrus Bellamy looked up to see who would hold his life in their hands. He saw the woman in the blue gown from the country club, and then, as she settled into the president's chair and drew a pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses out of her breast pocket and slid them onto her face, the 2 images collided in his mind. The elegant woman at the gala, and beneath her, surface slapsing something rising out of dark water, the tired patient in the church sale coat on the gurney in his emergency department, asking a nurse to confirm the time. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same terrible patience. The blood left Bellamy's face all at once. He made a sound, a small strangled cough, and gripped the edge of the little table so hard his knuckles went white. Beside him, Reyes glanced at his client's grey face, then followed his stare up to the woman at the center of the bench, then down to the case caption on the file. Emergency Department, Halford Memorial, June 26th, and then back to the board president, and Nathaniel Reyes, who had defended 1,000 hopeless cases, slowly closed his eyes and sat back in his chair. Because he understood, in that instant, that there was nothing left to defend. His client hadn't just mistreated a patient, he had mistreated her. The one woman in the state with the authority to end him had lain on his gurney and let him do it, and he had done all of it, and every word was written down. Renee Guillory did not smile. She did not lean forward in triumph. She pressed the button on her microphone, and when she spoke, her voice filled the windowless room with the flat, clear authority of someone reading a verdict. This proceeding is called to order, she said. We are convened to consider the disciplinary charges against Dr. Cyrus Bellamy, Dr. Guillory. Bellamy's voice came out cracked and high. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know it was you. You didn't know it was me, Renee repeated, and let the sentence hang there in the cold air until it became something ugly. Dr. Bellamy, is that your defense? That if you had known the woman on your gurney held power over your career, you'd have treated her like a human being? That basic medical care in your emergency department is contingent on the patient's ability to hurt you? She removed her glasses. Because if that is your defense, you've just told this panel everything it needs to know. No, Your Honor, Dr. Guillory. I was exhausted. The department was slammed. I made a mistake in judgment. Save it, she said, not loudly. She said it the way you'd close a book. I'm not going to ask you to characterize your own conduct, Dr. Bellamy, because your conduct has already been characterized. By you, in your own words, on your own floor. She opened the black binder, and she began to read. She read his words back to him exactly as he had said them, stripped of the crowded hallway and the fluorescent hum, and in the still, sealed room they landed like stones dropped into a well. You are not having a heart attack, and you are not staying in my emergency department. You people come through those doors every single night. If you'd made better choices, you'd have a doctor. You're wasting a bed a real patient needs. Each quote she read, Bellamy flinched, a small full-body flinch, as if the words were being applied to his skin. The public health official on the bench looked at him the way you look at something you've found under a rock. The retired judge had stopped taking notes and was simply staring. Renee set the transcript down. She looked at Cyrus Bellamy's stricken, pleading face, and for a moment something passed behind her own eyes that was not satisfaction. It was closer to grief. For the record, Dr. Bellamy, she said quietly. My chest pain was mild. I want to be honest with this panel about that. I was not, in fact, in cardiac distress that morning. I was there because 22 complaints against you crossed my desk over the last 4 years. And every one of them was dismissed by the people who sat in these chairs before me. Complaints from people who could not fight back. So I put on an old coat and I lay on your gurney for 2 hours and 40 minutes to see with my own eyes whether the complaints were true. She paused. They were true, they were. If anything, gentle, Dr. Guillory. Reyes tried, rising slightly. My client is prepared to enter a wellness program, to undergo bias training, to accept a period of supervised probation. Mr. Reyes. She didn't raise her voice. Please don't insult this panel. We both know that if I had actually been an uninsured woman from a rooming house, your client would not be repentant this morning. He'd have discharged me, chartered me as drug-seeking, and gone to lunch, and none of us would ever have heard my name. The remorse in this room is not remorse for what he did. It's fear of who I turned out to be. She let that settle. That is precisely the problem this board exists to solve. Bellamy had put his face in his hands. This panel has reviewed the full history, Renee went on, and now her voice had the steady tread of a thing that could not be stopped. 22 complaints spanning 4 years, describing a consistent, documented pattern of denying care to the poor, the uninsured, and black patients. 3 of those patients died. One of them, a 40-year-old man named Marcus Dawson. She did not look down at the file. She knew his name. Was discharged from your emergency department after you charted him as anxious and narcotic-seeking, and was found dead in your parking lot, 90 minutes later of a pulmonary embolism that a competent screening would have caught. His widow never received so much as a letter. She looked at her fellow commissioners. 5 faces looked back at her, grave, and 5 heads inclined, once, in unison. The failures here are not only Dr. Bellamy's. This board failed those families for years. Today we begin to correct that. She squared the begin to correct that. She squared the papers in front of her. By the unanimous finding of these found to have committed grave and repeated violations of the standards of medical practice and professional conduct in this state, we are recommending to the full board the immediate suspension and permanent revocation of his license to practice medicine. Bellamy's breath went out of him in a long, broken wheeze. Furthermore, Renee added, and now she looked at him directly. This board is referring the complete record of these proceedings, including the authenticated documentation of his conduct, to the National Board for Health Standards and to the federal officials currently reviewing his nomination. They should have the full picture before they make their decision. It was not a hearing anymore. It was a demolition. The fallout came fast and it came in public. Within 2 days the story broke in the Birmingham News, then the wire services picked it up, and by the weekend it was everywhere. Hospital chief faces license loss after turning away undercover state medical board president, the nurse's note, the timestamps, the phrase "you people." All of it detailed, all of it documented, none of it deniable. The security footage from the ER hallway leaked, and there was Bellamy on grainy video, leaning over a gurney and jabbing his finger, and there was the young charge nurse quietly walking to the workstation to enter the order he'd forbidden, and the internet did what the internet does. Camille Foster, who had put her whole career on a chart because it was the right thing to do, became something like a folk hero, and the board saw to it that no one at Harvard Memorial ever laid a hand on her job. The men who had toasted Cyrus Bellamy at the country club discovered they had urgent business elsewhere. The state senator who'd called him the future of American medicine put out a statement condemning his deeply troubling conduct. The hospital system CEO, who'd toasted healthcare as a business, announced Bellamy's immediate administrative leave in a memo that managed never to use his name warmly. The federal nomination died before the paperwork was even filed. The White House pulled his name so fast and so quietly that the official announcement of the seat's new candidate never mentioned that there had been another, facing certain revocation and near certain civil suits from the families whose complaints had finally seen daylight. Bellamy resigned his hospital position in a 3-line letter, surrendered his license before the board could formally strip it, and vanished from public life. A clause in the state's disciplinary rules cost him a large share of the pension he'd spent 30 years assuming was his by right. He tried, some months later, to open a small concierge practice in a distant suburb, and found that the people who could afford concierge medicine had read the same headlines as everyone else, and that a physician known for turning away the dying is not a physician anyone wants deciding whether their chest pain is real. 6 months after the morning she'd spent on that gurney, Renee Guillory stood at the window of her office on the 11th floor, looking out at the city going gold in the late light. On her desk sat a stack of new files, because there were always new files. Marcus Dawson's widow had written her a letter, in the end. Not the letter the woman should have received years ago, but a different one, thanking her, and Renee had read it 3 times and kept it in her top drawer. Desmond Pryor came in and set another folder on the pile. He glanced at the wall where they'd kept the timeline of the Bellamy case, now cleared. "Heard he's telling people he was railroaded," he said. "Politically motivated witch hunt. The whole song." Renee didn't turn from the window. She had never once felt joy at the wreck of Cyrus Bellamy's life, and she didn't feel it now. She felt the way a surgeon feels closing an incision over a tumor she's finally removed. Not triumph, just the quiet, bone-deep relief of a poison taken out of a body that can now begin to heal. She thought about Silas Pruitt, who had his heart failure managed now, at a clinic that had learned it could not afford to turn a veteran away. She thought about the Meeks baby, seen that same night, feverish from an ear infection that could have turned bad, sent home the next morning healthy. She thought about a young charge nurse who'd put down an armful of blankets and picked up her own courage instead. She thought about her mother, who had cleaned other people's houses and taught her daughter that the world sorts people into those it has to answer to and those it thinks it never will, and that the whole trick of a decent life is refusing to let it. Renee picked up her pen, pulled the first new file off the stack, and got back to work, because a man like Bellamy was never the only one, and there were other rooms in this state where someone with power was. At that very moment, looking at someone without it and deciding they didn't have to see them, not knowing, not for 1 second, who might be sitting quietly in the back, watching, in a coat from the church sale, waiting.